Today we've got a viewer request style video for Revisi-Verse. I'm going to be talking about episodes of the show that didn't need to happen. And this has grown from my current ongoing series of reviews of the Steven Universe ongoing comics. If you haven't been following those, I definitely think it's worth watching the reviews at the very least to see if you guys would like the comics. Because if you think you would, they're a really fun read. The Steven Universe ongoing series, while its art may be a little simple, it really feels like episodes of the show that would have been difficult for them to give us because they take us to locations that they maybe didn't have the budget to design backgrounds and stuff for. Not to mention that they're just well written, finding the voice of the show very well. And in reviewing those, I've talked a few times about how I think some of these stories would have made at least as good as, if not better, stories for the show itself than some of the episodes we got. So I was asked by one of you guys to put together a short list of some of the episodes that I feel like we didn't need from the show, episodes which maybe could have been replaced by something closer to what goes on in those ongoing comics. And this isn't exactly like the list of the episodes I feel like are the worst of the show. I'm going to be looking at episodes from kind of sort of a couple of different categories. You'll see what I mean when I get into the actual list. And there are definitely more episodes than this. Like, I feel like most of the episodes in this show have at least some value to them. But I definitely feel like the crew could have prioritized their time better. Especially considering that, like, there are still people today who don't feel like Peridot and Lapis got enough character stuff with each other and with Steven. The person who was supposed to have brought them together and created this life for them, helped them create this life for themselves together. For just one example. So, like, while there are other Townie episodes in here that I probably could slot into the place of some of these other ones, like, as cool as Buck can be, how many Buck Dewey and his dad episodes do we really need? Especially when several of them don't really seem to further their characters that much at all. And there's definitely going to be probably at least one controversial choice on this list. And there's definitely probably going to be more lists like this in the future. Because, again, while I feel that at least most episodes of the show have some merit to them, this is another way to break down episodes and discuss them, and that is the thing that I like to do. I also, looking at this list, realize that it's going to seem like I'm just attacking Townie episodes. But I don't think that Townie episodes are inherently bad or anything. I want to make that clear. The way I prioritize these, I'm looking at episodes that develop characters whose development didn't really mean much for the overarching show in the end. Or episodes that just didn't tell us anything much of value. They can be good episodes or bad episodes, but that's mainly where my thoughts on this fall. That said, we're doing 5 of these today, and number 5 is the one that I feel is probably going to be controversial, Garnets Universe. And now I want to be absolutely clear. I like this episode. I think it's really good. Really fun. Much like the 5th Star Trek movie, which has 2 scenes bookending the action of the main 3 characters having a campfire together and just being friends, with the rest of the movie being stuff that we just never needed to see in Star Trek. Keeping in mind that Garnets Universe is significantly better than that movie. I want to make that absolutely clear. We really didn't need Garnets Universe. Like, yeah, the stuff in the middle, Steven's story that he tells about Garnet, gives us some insight into the kind of person he sees Garnet as, a superhero who goes off and does secretive stuff away from her family when they're not looking. But we can glean that from other interactions between him and Garnet, so really the only stuff that we needed in this episode, that we needed for the characterization of these characters, was the mom and son type stuff that kind of bookended Steven's story. And again, I want to be clear, Steven's story is great. It was an example of doing something really fun with Steven's perspective, and all of the various story tropes, and specifically anime tropes that they worked into his story about Garnet, were really fun to see visualized in this style. I also like that it gave the voice actors something to do other than their normal thing. But as much fun as it was, that stuff between her and Steven, that mom and son-ish stuff between her and Steven, could have gone into another episode. And I would argue that we've gotten enough similar scenes in other episodes that they basically did anyway. And the rest of it was just stuff that we didn't need. There are other episodes that could probably go into this slot. Like, I just talked about how much I like Beach Party, but it could probably go in this slot too, since while it did have stuff in there about the gems and the humans being able to interact with each other on friendly terms, all of the stuff about them working together to defeat a gem threat didn't really come to fruition anywhere else. So the episode itself probably wasn't super needed. That's basically what I'm saying about this episode too. This is an episode that, while it has good stuff in it, probably didn't need to be an episode on its own. And just to clarify, just because it didn't need to be an episode doesn't mean that it shouldn't have been either. I'm not saying I know better than the crew. There are plenty of episodes and plenty of shows that don't need to be part of the show, but we still want them to be because they're a lot of fun. And this is one of those. Number 4 is one kind of along a similar vein, but for a similar reason, and that's Onion Trade. An episode which, while it does give us some insight into the character of Onion, that insight is really repeated elsewhere, I feel. And it introduces a gem artifact that I feel wasn't fully thought out and never should have been in the show, and that's the Replicator Wand, or I usually call it the Duplication Wand. It's actually called the Replicator Wand. And I just feel like any of these older gem technology or artifact episodes from before they'd really thought through what gems were and what their technology was probably didn't need to be here, at least in the form that they are. They should have worked on fleshing that stuff out better before sticking it in the show. Because I've talked about this elsewhere so many times, but the Replicator Wand brings up questions that I don't feel like the show was ever equipped to answer. Like, yes, the stuff made by the wand is extremely temporary, but this should still be a conflict-breaking weapon. Anyone who has one of these during a war should be invincible. Even with all of the supposed restrictions that the fandom has put on this thing, it should give any side in possession of it an untold advantage. And yet it doesn't seem like it was used in the Gem War at all. And that alone makes its inclusion in the show stupid, in my opinion. Which again, like the last entry, isn't to say that there's nothing good in this episode. There are good moments in this episode. It's pretty funny. Like, if it weren't for the fact that the wand is just baffling on all levels, this would be just a good comedy episode. But it's kind of like the time travel hourglass thing from Steven and the Stevens. This is just a thing that's... it's too powerful. And I don't think should have existed. Ever. So I don't feel like we needed this episode either. Number 3 is Love Letters. An episode which furthers the story of Jamie the Mailman. Who I don't hate. But man, if there is any character in this show that I forget about until I'm reminded of him, it's Jamie. And that is in part because I don't hate him. I remember Ronaldo because I hate Ronaldo so much of the time. I remember the pizzas because I like the pizzas so much. But Jamie, while he has his moments, and while there are some moments in this particular episode that are pretty funny, he's such a non-character to me. He doesn't really ever impact anything in any meaningful way. Unless there's something that I'm forgetting somewhere, and if I am, please point it out to me. I really feel like Jamie, of all of the characters who are given legitimate development in the show, is the one whose development was least necessary. Because, like, even Ronaldo, they were trying to do something with him. Clearly, they were trying to do something with that character. But Jamie, he's just here to give us a little bit of insight into Garnet. That, like, this show has a main romantic couple in Steven and Connie. We could have gotten that same insight in one of their stories. Like, it's not the worst. I think all of Jamie's melodrama in particular is pretty funny. And Garnet's stuff about the nature of love at the end of the episode is good. But the episode just didn't need to be here, and there could have been a different story in its place. And so it makes this list. And next up is Restaurant Wars, an episode along a similar vein. Like, these are characters that I like better, except for Ronaldo. And I definitely feel like these are characters who got more development over the course of the show, so getting more of their development does make sense. But what was the point of this episode? In the long short of the show, what was the point of this episode? What did it accomplish? It showed how clever Steven can be at conflict resolution, but then the entire epilogue series was about how Steven needs to stop trying to resolve other people's conflicts because it's harmful to him. What was the point of showing us that Steven's good at conflict resolution if that was going to be the end of his arc? Rather than, finding a healthy way to help people resolve their conflicts without becoming dependent on it. Which is what I feel that Future should have been. That reminded me, we're not doing any Future episodes on this list today because there's more of them than you realize, probably. But really, most of the things I said about the last episode, I think apply here just to the situation rather than the specific character. This is an episode that I often forget exists until I'm reminded of it. There are good gags in here, there are some pretty good visuals in here, and there are characters I like in here, but seeing where the series went and how it developed some of these themes, I feel like this is an episode that did not need to exist. Period. Honorable mention before we talk about number 1 goes to Say Uncle, an episode that you guys know I think doesn't need to exist. I don't need to go into more detail about it here. Watch my review of it if you don't know my arguments for that. But even Say Uncle has its moments where it's worth watching. An episode that I genuinely feel doesn't, though, is number 1. An episode, it's probably the only episode of the show that I think is, genuinely terrible. I think it's just a bad episode. And that's Rannil. Yes, I get what the crew was trying to do here by poking fun at over-obsessive fans a little bit. But this episode just takes Rannil, who up to that point was one of those annoying types of characters who still does funny stuff, and so you kind of like to hate him. It's enjoyable to be annoyed by this character, and turned him into someone who is just the worst. We see all of his despicable, selfish behavior in this episode, and while the episode does end with him treating the gems and their story more carefully and being more accurate with the things he says about them, he has still taken their story and used it for himself to raise awareness to the weird kinds of stuff that he talks about on his blog. He's still appropriated their story for his own purposes. If the episode had ended with Rannil coming to Steven and the gems and apologizing for his behavior throughout the episode and saying, hey, when you guys are ready to tell the world about yourselves, let me help you to make up for how I treated you here, that would have been one thing. But that's not how the episode ends. The episode ends with him doing the exact same thing he was doing at the beginning of the episode that started all of this. Just being nicer about it. And spreading more accurate information. He is selfish and entitled from beginning to end in this thing. And while the episode makes clear that that kind of behavior sucks, he doesn't really change. And then we don't really do much else with the character, so it never really gets followed up on. It's bafflingly bad. And I feel like, yeah, some fans were pretty hard on the crew when the show was going on. They're still hard on the crew now, but specifically when the show was still going on. And I do feel like this episode was a chance for the crew to take out some of that frustration on those fans. But I feel like some of their criticisms were a little more broad than they needed to be, too. Tell me, Crewniverse, what is wrong with people making gemstonas? It's a little cringy, right? But, it's not cringy in a super bad way, so what's wrong with it? I've even got one. Seriously, guys, come on. Are they specifically criticizing people who want their gemstonas to show up in the show by having Rannil and his gemstona sort of force their way into Steven's life? Is that what was going on here? Because, it felt a little more general than that some of the time. And, I know it sounds like I was a little offended by it, and that's coloring my opinion here, but that's kind of a little bit true. That is one of the things that I have taken into account when judging this episode. It's not nearly all of what I've taken into account when judging this episode, but it is part of it. It's one of the reasons I don't like Lion 4 either very much. Because it feels like the crew was saying, hey, don't theorize about our show where we stuck a bunch of clues in for people to theorize about. But end of the day, so much of this episode was just the gems standing around and watching Rannil be ridiculous and horrible to Steven. And that's how I feel watching this episode. I feel like I'm standing around watching someone be absolutely horrible to a character I care about, and that's just not fun for me at all. This episode, more so, I feel, than any other episode of the show, did not need to exist. Even the usually pretty fun Ronaldo predictions that might turn out to be true down the line don't make Rocknaldo any fun to me. I just don't see the value in this one whatsoever. Like I said, though, I do plan to make more lists like this in the future. Specifically, more episodes we didn't need lists, but more lists in general. Lists are fun for me. It's like putting 5 to 10 mini reviews in the same video, which I just get a kick out of that. So, what do you guys think about the episodes that I put on this list? What episodes would you have put here? Maybe I'll even talk about them in the next one. And what other lists would you like to see me put together? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out links to my various social medias, as well as the many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description, but either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.